Ostrom said that if we take into account all the negative events that have to do with consumption and production of agri-food systems, we have the costs already superseding what is produced. So it's not just about environmental, but also economic rationality. So when we take all these local innovations and take the set of what exists in terms of incentives, in terms of conventional practices, we come to a zero-sum or negative-sum game. So this balance is essential. This means something in this transition strategy has to be changed. The third topic I'd like to mention to add to our conversation is a kind of a warning. What is this warning? Nowadays, many of the technologies that are being projected or as climate solutions potentially may and do have a negative effect on the inequality agenda because of the model they are based on for experimentation. Two examples. One alternative which is mentioned frequently is artificial protein or lab meat, which can have a positive environmental impact, but because of the business model that has been designed, it tends to have a negative impact on inequalities. I don't have time to go into details. That's just the topic on the table. And another issue, which is very important in the case of Brazil, are the alternatives for moderate intensification of cattle raising and reforesting agriculture, which may also have a negative impact on the land market and the labor market, depending on the market the government that implements it. I'm not saying the experiments should not happen. I'm just talking about the type of incentives and the undesirable effects that may be contained in these initiatives and that can be applied depending on the business model we adopt. So these 3 points are part of the concerns that mobilize our organizations in order to propose an initiatives such as Think Food and Climate. And I would like to end up by saying that simply one of the things within this initiative is to create a space which in our viewpoint must be necessarily plural. As Patrick said, it must be a space to debate controversies and find convergence based on differences. It's not a space to reinforce dichotomies. It's to reinforce converging dialogues. And for that, we're going to have one or some ideas which can guide these ideas. Professor Ricardo Abramovay has insisted on the idea of breaking with the monotony of food systems. I know he's going to talk about this. I won't go into that too deeply, but it is efforts like this that can help us to promote a turning point, swift change. Brazil can help us with this because we have the expertise, capability, leadership in the business sector. We have innovative managers. The least we can do is to create a space within which these convergences appear and within which they form a kind of a roadmap which would allow us to do what we frequently claim or even demand from the energy production sector. We were at last year's COP meeting, and one issue frequently touched on was a phase-out strategy regarding fossil fuels. I would use the same parallel idea. We need a phase-out strategy of the conventional production and consumption models within the agri-food systems. So we have to work with a diversity of paths and models, but this diversity must be guided by certain principles that signal this fair, sustainable transition that we so desire. If our initiatives contribute towards creating such a space, I think we will have fulfilled a major objective. So that is the invitation I leave here. I think I stuck to my time well. So thank you very much, Nadine. And I now give the floor to my other colleagues for their part of the debate. Yes, strictly within time. Very, very, very good. Thank you for sharing your ideas with us, Arilson. And we want to consolidate, of course. May we consolidate this sense of urgency. may it be the guiding force within what we want to guide this transformation work. I'd like to remind you that questions can be made in the chat box at any time, and at the end, they will be guided or directed at the speakers so they can answer. Now, studies show that 60% of the world middle class will be concentrated in 11 Asian Pacific countries in the next few years, and giving these nations a central role in the definition of global trends vis-à-vis consumption and production. So, in the following presentation, Marcelo Brito will comment on what the consumption trends indicate. Marcelo, Executive Secretary of Amazonia Legal, you have the floor. Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here with great people. Nadine, Patrick, Ricardo, Arilson, Isabel, Marcelo. I'd like to say, first of all, I'm not a researcher or a scientist. I'm a scholar and an enthusiast in the area. Since this subject has to do with our agro-environmental study, it's very useful to talk about the future of Brazil's agriculture. I think we are on the right path. I would like to talk about market structure. First of all, linking with the world. Major transformation will only happen if we are able to make these instances of transformation at a global scale. We need scale. Why am I saying this? I'm going to take an example from the US. If you're going to buy food at Whole Foods stores, which is a major grocery store, they are very concerned about how, where food is produced. This creates an annual revenue of $16 billion. If you go to Walmart, that sells to the mass, the US mass population, there is no such strict demands that Whole Foods has. The revenue is now $280 billion. So we have a path to tread that is screaming at us, something has to be done. When we go through Europe, it's no different. The main countries in Europe, in these countries, expenditure on food is not even 10% of the family expenses. So in these countries, you have a willingness for transformation that is higher than in those, for example, Greece, Spain, Portugal, Italy, where economic situation is not that great, where the expenditure on food is higher, so food has to be taken into account. Within this time, the food themes launched in the COP in Egypt gained traction in Dubai last year and even more in Brazil next year. And they come along with all these proposals for new technologies, etc. I'd like to remind you that the difference between traditional agriculture and regenerative agriculture, with everything that involves the latter, it's like comparing allopathy and homeopathy. With one, we cure a headache in 15 minutes with a pill, knowing that that pill will harm you in the long run. In the regenerative sector, it's like homeopathy. You have to predict that in 15 days, you'll have a headache. 4 days before you start taking medication, 4 days later, it will pass. It works the same way. And there is technology proving this. We go into the second axis, which is financing. We need to convince the world financial system that they need to finance this new kind of agriculture using the same interest rates or even less, but without having the risk analysis history for vis-a-vis financial and risk and agronomy risks, but analyzing through benefits because of the climate problems. The third axis, that's the most difficult of all, because it is to convince citizens that they need to change a practice that is 50, 100 years old, practiced by families, at the risk of that if it loses out, he loses his job, right? His crop is his breadwinner. So those are the key transformation pillars under a primary point of view and agriculture itself.
So we have an issue of production because of climate changes, and we see what was Brazil going to 3 degrees. It's a absurd transformation, and I'm sure that this transition will happen. The problem is how long it will take, and Asia is the one who's going to do this transition, and I want to show you quickly why I think Asia is the one who's going to do this transition. Just let me know if you can see my screen. Okay, in this small circle that we see here, these are the countries of the Asian countries. Here we have more people than in the rest of the world. Within this circle, we have 60% of the world youth. And Brazil is not there anymore. So within the circle, according to World Bank, until 2030, it will have more than 60% of the world middle class. And who moves the world is the middle class. This I'm showing quickly. All kinds of world transformation, they went through Asia, and the impacts in commercial trade interactions. This is interesting. Countries from MENA, they have diminishing their debts and increasing their investments with what happening in Latin America. So even there, the transformation is within Asia. But I want to bring your attention to this research, which is the most recent in the sector. It was done in company, done with different countries on consumption categories, more than 16,000 interviewed. And here they divided the 5 items that they classify as sub-items. It's environmental consciousness, environmental and social consciousness, consciousness on health, lifestyle, health consciousness, and best value for money. And people say, oh, Europe is the place of the world with social environmental place, and the research shows that it isn't. They're just the same United States, Europe, and APAC. But when we talk about health and sustainability, we can see the difference of Asian countries when related to other regions in the world. And when we talk about this awareness as well, in Asia, there's the idea that only young people are concerned with this, that old people are not concerned about this. But this myth has been broken. The importance of sustainable awareness, you can see here by age groups, and we see this environmental awareness. We see that there is a very little difference from 60 years onwards. And even when we divide this concern on economical groups, when we see the middle class and the high class, we see a very little difference. So the pandemic brought a process of awareness advancement, and there was a leap in this market that has never happened before. So, but people ask me, what are the items that consumers want the most, or they are more concerned about or more interested in? Number one, it's multiple choice. So you had like 100 things you could choose. Number one, healthy ingredients, 20%. Number two, natural products, 18%. 3, additive chemical-free products, 15%. Organic products, 11%. It's amazing. Sustainable packaging, 8%. Products with the symbols about sustainability that have already been acknowledged in this field, 8%, and also local sourcing, 7%. So this is a significant transformation in a consumer market. I've highlighted here 3 areas that are really important. These are 3 countries really populous. First one, China, with natural and sustainable symbols. In the third one, chemical additive free. In India, natural in first, healthy ingredients is in second place, and organic in third place. In Indonesia, we have chemical additive free in first, natural second, and healthy ingredients 70%. And specific data on Indonesia is that they have an example on low salt ingredients. So from country to country, you have small differences. And here we discuss 90% are willing to pay premium for better products. And here is the say-do gap. So they measure the difference because people say, okay, are you sustainable? Yes, of course. Do you want to transform more? Yes, of course. And when you check directly if that is already happening, there is a huge gap in all of these countries. But the most interesting thing that although we have this gap, the volume of consumers that have this embedded in themselves in terms of purchasing structure is quite interesting. But what are the gaps that we need to face, and what are the challenges so that we can speed up this process? High price is an issue, and we know that any sustainability transformation process will generate costs, but afterward it will be lower in the chain. So 16% is high price, lack of information, 15%. They don't trust what brands claim, 6%, lack of variety, 12%, lack of sustainable alternatives, 9%, time consuming to find sustainable products is 11%, low availability in the market, 10%, and products that are not entirely sustainable with low quality, 14%, and lower quality, 7%. So we see all the proper levels can improve this a lot. We can see in countries how important the companies are in this process, and this pressure cannot diminish 40% in Vietnam, South Korea, and said that the companies and brands are very important in this process, and also in Vietnam, also 40%. And now I want to explain to you why this process is going to be slower, because it has a geopolitical issues involved. To change the production infrastructure, we need to understand that in the space of people, we have 400 million small producers. Smallhold farmers is a concept. Smallhold farmers is the one that it's a family runs the business. So 400 million smallhold farmers that respond to 40% of Asian agricultural produce. So the government will not let them hanging. So this transformation will happen in small productions. And naturally, this is a slower cycle that can be sped up if the tip of the consumption matches with the offer. And this is how we should discuss in the national and international society. So thank you so much. My time is over, and
Muito obrigada, Marcelo.
thank you, Marcelo.
Esgotado, mas agradeço muito por compartilhar
I
com a
really
gente os
thank
pilares
you
da
for
transformação, os
talking about
padrões
us
de
about the pillars of
comunicação, da
transformation of
produtividade
consumption and
envolvidos,
production
porque
and
a Ásia
everything that is
e a
involved,
classe média
because
asiática
Asia
vai ser o
and
centro dessa transformação,
Asian
inclusive
middle class will
quebrando alguns
be the
mitos em
center
torno do
of this
tema do
transformation,
F
breaking a few
fundamental.
myths.
E para encerrar as apresentações
And
do webinar,
to
eu queria
close the
convidar o
webinar
Abramovay,
presentation, I
professor
invite
titular
Ricardo
da Universidade de
Abramovay,
Castro e professor
uh,
sênior da
professor of
Especialização
the
Ambiente da
Josué de
Universidade de
Castro
São
Chair
Paulo.
and senior
Ele
professor
pode apresentar
at
agora
the Institute
reflexões
of
sobre
Energy
como
and
chegar
Environment
aos
at the
30
University of São
agroalimentários
Paulo.
dominantes na
Ricardo
atualidade.
now presents
E
data
ele
from the
promete
World Bank
agora
report that
provar
demonstrates
a
how the food
contribuição desse
system
sistema
contributes
para a crise
significantly
climática
to the
global.
global
Lembrando que
climate
vocês podem deixar
crisis.
perguntas no chat e
And
nós,
I'm
quando a gente
reminding
bater
you
ao
that
final
you
dessa
may leave your
apresentação
questions in
também,
the chat
vai
box and that
responder
we'll
elas.
have
Seja
time
bem-vindo, Ricardo, a palavra é sua.
to answer this at the end of the presentation. Thank you, Nadine. It's a great pleasure being here with such wonderful colleagues, and Isabel organized this initiative. Patrick, my dear friend from such a long time, and that who has an amazing background and career, and Josué working at Cebrap, and Marcelo, who is a fundamental leader in the sense of thinking about agribusiness and relieving uh, uh, all kinds of polarizations, and have that and had an important role in the sectorism fundamentalism that ruled us in the last 4 years. So it's a great pleasure being here and listening to these presentations. And although they are different, they are very convergent. I think it's quite important to understand that one of the conditions that allowed Brazil to go from a huge importer to a huge exporter is the way how they worked with the agriculture in the Cerrado region. This transformation allowed to increase productivity and made Brazil to be an important player in global scene. Science and technology created by Embrapa and also different universities. They were quite important for that. This transformation is one of the most iconic issues that since the Second World War rules the world, and the global philanthropy. There will be an event in June in Rio about philanthropy, and agri-food systems will be approached. The Norman Borlaug approach with Rockefeller Foundation shows what ruled these scientific and scientific and political groups at the time. And this was shown in 3 objectives. Brazil has a huge role in this. First, increase the offer of calories. That means to make homogeneity in different countries to produce seeds. That's the essence of the Green Revolution. Second, to increase the offer of proteins through genetic transformations on birds and swines, and basically increase that in societies that relied on grains for, and also to diminish the gap between wholesale and retailers. These 3 things are really important. This has been changed. 1 in 3 inhabitants in the 60s really and access to food, and this is even worse today, but this means 1 in every 10 people has a food safety. So if it's not unanimous, this is quite generalized in multilateral organizations, from the most important scientific organizations, in social movements, and business organizations as well. When we see that this foods global system responds to 1/3 of the greenhouse effects, as the recent report shows, Recipe for Life plans, and it shows that the agri-food system is the main driver of biodiversity. It responds to some of the most important pollution issues with animal waste as well. So it's important to have this Asian awareness that Marcelo was showing us, and this system is at the origin of overweight global pandemic, and it's one of the diseases that kill more. This the non-transmissible disease such as diabetes type 2, obesity, and so on. So from the most contemporaneous tropical country, our challenge is that Brazil will lead the ecological transition. The EU has a lot of limits. They had the plan of transforming the agri-food ecological transformation that was really ambitious, but this plan was totally buried. We cannot say, oh, the Europeans were realistic. This kind of things is impossible. It's important to have an ecological transition on agriculture. So we, as Arilson said, as Patrick showed, we Brazilians, we have science, technology, social movements on agriculture, of citizens and consumers, and business ability for that. But what is this transformation about? The World Economic Forum, produced with the help of the Accenture consulting company, we're talking about the dominant sectors, the thinkers of the world in the financial world. They launched a program called New Frontiers of Nutrition. It's quite interesting when we go into the internet, when we saw the short videos that they are transmitting from this program on. So they're doing a very interesting campaign towards fighting the ultra-processed products. I've never seen the World Economic Forum fighting an important sectors in its own composition. And they published in December a document that in which they say that when the main objective of the agri-food system was to provide calories and proteins in large scale to the world, this time has gone. The agri-food system needs to have other goals. And Marcelo is quite right when he said that our problem scale, but a scale in a dimension that cannot be the replica of what was the Green Revolution. It's not a scale based on agro, livestock, landscape.
What the World Economic Forum is questioning is a system where human food loses connections to the territories. Marcelo actually mentioned that in his poll survey carried out in Asia, and about if you depend on anonymous, monotonous, standardized products with items that are not in the traditional kitchen, which contribute to a modification, so to speak, of the agri-food aspect, so to speak, and also impacts people's health. It's difficult to find such an extensive contestation for the current situation vis-à-vis food, especially from an industrial think tank. In Brazil, I think especially the Ministry of Finance is trying to move in that direction. The text actually proposes that producers be paid based on the diversity and nutritional power of their crops, and that they be supported to receive products in their communities that are based on sustainable practices. That's the opposite of what the situation is now. In the US, for example, 94% of subsidies go towards only 6 products in a context where extreme climate events are imposing greater losses on production. As Arilson said, the expenditure on agricultural insurance should reach $1.37 trillion. Industry, we have to include them. The study by the World Economic Forum says that Brazil should exclude all damaging ingredients and include products which are as healthy as non-processed. I think that it's a question of creating totally new products, reinventing the formula that exists, and non-processed foods being included. The study published in the Telegraph last September moves in the same direction. The global agri-food system was monotonous and is translated by the fact that 75% of calories it offers are concentrated in only 6 products. The discussion actually is the famous land sharing and land sparing. In other words, the green revolution mindset is, let us concentrate technical progress on a few areas so we can free up areas for biodiversity. This is currently unsustainable. We need biodiversity in the interior part of um, agri-cattle areas so that they are less and less susceptible to climate crises. Think Food and Climate is being created for us to dive deeper into this discussion. I think our main challenge, and here I would like to actively recommend the article published by Marcelo recently in the AgriFeed newsletter, that the opportunities given by the current functioning of the agri-food system offered in Brazil, the opportunities are enormous. But we have a contradiction there. Our macroeconomic balance currently depends on the monotony of our agricultural and stock production. The continuity of the production of this sector, on the other hand, brings with it enormous systemic risks. In the last year, agricultural losses due to climate were over 300 billion. I don't know if dollars or reais. The increase in soy production, instead of having a bolo effect, it has a Jerus effect. In other words, as soy is more and more productive, it is occupying more and more space, including in the Amazon region. And the big food players, right, the major companies who are actually central players in this transformation, are transforming favorable infrastructures favorable to this expansion of soy in the Amazon region and the Cerrado Savannah regions. Many may say we're producing food, but I think something we'll have to discuss also is, do you think China will continue to increase the dependence of their supply on proteins coming from so far away and so highly threatened by the climate crisis? Could the animal raising models, the chair and the Josué de Castro chair and other entities can, help to look at this? Could China by itself consumes on its own 45% of antibiotics destined for animals worldwide. I think that some issues we have ahead of us in this last minute I'd like to mention. So many big food companies, such as major um, landowners in Brazil, now feel the climate crisis effect and are seeking technologies to fight these effects. Thus far, these technologies have not altered the monotony of our agricultural landscape, but some of them try to recover land biodiversity and attenuate the extreme climate events, their effect. We have to see what these changes are actually about. This is, I think, should be the first research project of Think Food and Climate. Regenerative and organic animal food is growing a lot in Brazil. I'm not just talking about native sugar San Francisco farm. I'm talking about other initiatives. What business models are geared towards the emergence of a regenerative agriculture or farming? What are the paths towards reformulating cattle raising, responsible for almost half of the emissions by cattle breeding, the cattle breeding sector? Many things go beyond the dichotomy of family farming producing food, major agriculture producers for export. That's over now. We now have to look at how the whole set of the agri-food system is reacting in terms of biodiversity solution, and that is what Think Food and Climate is about. That is what
Muito
they are
obrigada,
working
Ricardo. A sua
with and
fala
about. Thank
sempre
you,
tão
Ricardo.
instigante, né?
Such an
Obrigada por trazer
instigating
esses dados, essa
presentation as
conversa,
usual.
que
Thank you for
atualmente está
that
tão
data
clara,
and
inclusive a
this
partir do
warning,
Fórum
which is
Econômico
so
Mundial a respeito dos
clear based
ultraprocessados, e
on
por
the
ainda
World Economic
terminar
Forum
a sua fala dando
talking
esses
about
spoilers sobre as
ultra-processed food.
pesquisas
And
e
now
as
you're
o foco
providing
de
this
pesquisa
spoiler
da
about the
iniciativa Think Food and
research
Climate.
focus of
Bom,
the
então
Think
agora
Food and
vamos às
Climate
perguntas do
Initiative.
nosso público,
So
que
let's
foram
move on
sendo
to our
incluídas no
Q&A
chat, né,
session,
durante
some of them in the
as
chat
falas dos
box,
nossos panelistas, e fique à
included
vontade
during
para
our
incluir as
panelists'
últimas perguntas, se
presentations.
assim
Feel free to
sentir.
include the last few
Houve uma
questions
pergunta sobre
as
onde é possível
they
encontrar os documentos que estão
come
sendo
up.
mencionados
A question
aqui.
was
Eu
asked about
reforço o
where to
convite
find the
já feito pela
documents
Isabel, está
mentioned here. I
disponível no
reinforce
site da
Isabel's
Cátedra José de Castro, que
invitation
inclusive
to
acabou de ser reformulado.
go and
Tem no
visit
site do
the
Imaflora, do
website,
Cebrap
as well as
Sustentabilidade.
Imaflora,
Muitos
Cebrap
desses materiais
Sustainability,
podem ser encontrados
Sustentabilidade.
lá.
All these documents
Uma
can be found
pergunta
in
que
these sites.
apareceu também,
One
da
question
da
that
Cláudia
came up
Silva,
here,
como
based
podemos fazer
on
para que o
what Claudia
debate
Silva
saia do
said,
nível
coming from Claudia Silva,
acadêmico e
is
passe
how
para
do
um
these
nível
debates
mais
come
prático,
out of
né?
academia and become more
Entendendo que
practical?
estamos num tempo histórico que
Understanding
a
that we are at a
polarização é tão
historical moment
marcante,
where
como é que é
polarization is
possível
so
combater a
blatant, how
dicotomia
can we
e
fight the
promover essa
dichotomy
convergência, né,
and
que foi
promote
tão
this
destacada
convergence,
por
which
todos os
has been
panelistas,
highlighted by all
mais
speakers,
marcadamente pelo Patrick,
and
pelo
especially
Arilson,
by Arilson,
enfim, fica
Patrick?
aberto para que vocês possam
So
responder essa
open for
primeira
you to
pergunta, que
answer
talvez
this
seja
first question,
uma de
which will
grande
perhaps
dificuldade, talvez
be
seja a pergunta de milhões,
difficult, very
mas
difficult.
deixo aberto
It's
para
a
vocês
question
responderem
asked by
essa primeira
millions,
pergunta, depois temos
4 millions.
outras um pouco mais
I'll give
focadas
you the
em
first
temas
question. The other
específicos.
questions are most focused on specific
Posso pegar
themes.
essa, não?
Yeah, I can take this one on, can I?
Claro que sim, Marcelo.
A
Sure.
linguagem científica não é a linguagem da base da
Scientific
produção
language
de
is
alimentos
not
em qualquer país
the
do mundo,
food
tá?
production-based language anywhere in the
E quanto
world.
mais polarizado for esse
And the
país,
more
pior.
polarized the country is,
Cabe a
the worse
nós
it
a
is.
criação de uma
It is
metalinguagem
up
para
to us to
acessar esse
create
público.
a meta
Eu vou dar
language to
exemplo
reach
para
this
vocês. Quando você chegar no
audience, this
corredor da
public.
soja do
An
milho nos Estados
example,
Unidos,
when you
entre
go
Iowa, Illinois, Nebraska,
to
você
Iowa,
começa uma
Illinois,
conversa falando
Nebraska,
sobre
and you go
mudança
to a
climática,
supermarket, right?
você
And you talk about climate change,
termina a conversa imediatamente.
you end the
Só
conversation
que quando você
immediately.
anda por lá, você está
But
andando
when you
num
are
mar
in these
de torres
areas,
eólicas,
you
de
are in a
fontes
sea
solares,
of
de
wind towers,
projetos de CCS,
solar panels,
de armazenamento de carbono, de estações de biometano,
carbon
de transformações
storage,
regenerativas na
biomethane
parte
stations,
produtiva. Ponto 1.
regenerative
Ponto
stations
2.
with regard to
Esses estados são
production.
governados por republicanos
Also, these
que
are
acham que
Republican
qualquer
states
coisa
who
relacionada
think
com
that
mudança climática é
anything to
coisa de
do with
esquerda,
climate
é
change is a
coisa de
lefty
democrata.
thing. It's a
Mas quando a
Democrat
gente olha
thing.
no
But when
RRA,
we
o
look at
Inflation
the
Reduction Act, que é esse pacote de
RRIA,
subsídios
the
monstruosos
package of
para combate à
enormous
mudança climática do
subsidies
governo
to fight climate change by the American government, the states that use this funding more were the Republican states, which says that what matters here is the meta language used. We have to invent or bring up a new language to talk to this public. We have to go through this cheap polarization, this absurd party politic discourse, because within strategic intelligence, therein lies the systems transformation. So it's not pointing fingers and bringing in catastrophic structures, that we change the cognitive availability or disposition. In terms of cognitive transformation, you need meta language. Things are happening. You have to necessarily say what is you think, and it has to fit in. The production sector needs to evolve a lot. Environmental sector as well, with regard to their communication structure, partnership structure, and structure of adequate language to transform the types of production. Thank you.
Isabel?
Isabel.
Eu queria também adicionar alguns elementos
I'd like to add a few elements here to that answer. I think what we want to do through this initiative, the translation of what science, research show and reveal towards the practical steps and towards changes, be whether in the way Marcelo mentioned, in other words, producers' behaviors, and also in terms of the changes we must create within our public decision makers, which means we need better public policies. I'll give you an example from study to practical. Imaflora, for a while now, has been studying our main line of credit, which finances cattle raising and agriculture in Brazil, which is the Safra plan. We have the Safra plan and we have family farming Safra plan. Two instruments, each one with their own amount of resources. The Safra plan, Plano Safra, has some, sorry, she's breaking up, has some instances which are to finance production, but has other lines which funds models which are still unsustainable. And we don't have much information on that. So the researchers and science role in NGOs that work with techniques, science, and public policies, their role is to understand why so many resources from the Safra plan does not finance mainly what is sustainable. We do have some answers. Based on these answers, we have to change public policies, incentives, so then we move on to the practical side. For example, in the northern region of Brazil, public credits, financing credits, are used mainly to buy cattle. So what's the use of continuing to fund just cattle purchasing if the cattle farmer has pasture which is not good, managed with techniques that can be described by Embrapa for good pasture management? What seems obvious is not necessarily obvious. We need to reveal this data, the real function of practices, in order to change them. So science, research, and practices, when we're talking about transformation, public policy improvement, of reconsidering models and how they are financed, is to talk about science that is totally practice-oriented.
Patrick, por favor.
Nadine, eu não sei
Patrick,
se eu continuo ou se você
please.
quer passar para outra pergunta.
Do I continue or do you want to move on to another
Se
question?
quiser contribuir, por favor.
Yes, if you want to pitch in, please do.
Well, eu vou começar pelo
I will
fato de
start
dizer
off
que
by saying that
paradoxo
there is a
incrível
paradox, an
a
amazing
polarização,
paradox,
em vez de contribuir
that
à transformação,
polarization, instead of
muitas
contributing
vezes
to
leva à
transformation,
procrastinação.
frequently leads to
Devido
procrastination.
o relacionamento de forças
due to the relationship of forces, the best way of not changing anything is to just accept polarization. In the case, it is already the case, in our case, it leads to a deep revolution which we don't know where, what will conclude in. So between these two paths, there is the one which is geared towards building transformation intelligences in order to break with polarization. And polarization is not easy to break down. Of course, syntax, vocabulary and formulas and all that, right? As Marcelo and Isabel mentioned so well, it's all about political position frequently with regard to the fact that when there is this polarization, very well said, quote, pointing fingers before by one of the presenters, when one party criticizes the other, not even knowing why they don't agree, but they have to disagree. They have to be the other side. They have to point fingers. It's a delegitimization strategy, as I said during my speech. And in order to move on to another level, a collective construction strategy, the first step depends on understanding why we do not agree. The agreement is essential. The agreement on disagreement demands institutional arrangements that allows for mediation, mutual respect, and allows for understanding strategies and positions that are, if they are delegitimized, why? That is an essential step so that later on, through construction, move on to an agreement on disagreement. The agreement on disagreement, moving towards disagreement on an agreement, you start to establish a collective solution, but you still don't agree. And then finally, through a negotiation effort, you move on, when possible, to this convergence, and we'll move on then to an agreement on agreement. So agreement on disagreement and disagreement on agreement, to disagreement on agreement through co-design and agreement on agreement through another process. This needs an institutional arrangement which is proper in order to build a better future. That's why this initiative seems great to me in terms of its ability to build conditions for such a dialogue.
Muito obrigada pelas respostas tão concretas, né,
Thank you
sobre
for your
tema que
answers.
costuma ficar muito mais no campo das ideias e muitas vezes
It's
sem resposta.
good because we're more
A gente
on
tem
the
também
field of
a
ideas,
pergunta de Frank, né, ele era
not only on the
que
fields of
diz assim,
ideas. We
no
also have the
agro,
question
a mitigação vai vir pela
in
oferta ou
agro,
pela
the
demanda,
mitigation
né?
comes
O
in
Frank
offer
colocava que o
or
agro é um
demand,
agente gerador de
because
recursos
agro is at the same
primários.
time,
E a pergunta é se existe espaço
if
para uma
there's any
transferência de
question
recursos de
to
atividades
transfer
positivas
resources
para negativas via
from
impostos
positive
de
to
carbono,
negative
por exemplo.
through
E o Fábio Ramos
carbon
colocou que a
taxes, for
produção
instance.
orgânica
And
aumenta
also,
na
if
Ásia e na Europa
the
e no
organic
Oriente,
production is
ela é
increasing in Africa
inevitável
and in the
para
United
algumas
States and Asia,
políticas públicas para
what's
suportar esse setor
lacking for
e
Brazil
aumentar a
to
produção orgânica também, né,
invest
de forma a ser uma
these
alternativa a
things
essas
as an
indústrias em aspas, como
alternatives,
foi falado.
as it has been said? Well, I can get this one. Thank you for the question. First of all, I'd like to highlight that the production is increasing, and two, a good part of the big food and of the farms in places such as Cerrado, of the big farms, I think that what I'm going to say is one of the drivers of behavior changes. These sectors are clearly feeling the impacts of environmental changes. The idea is that climatic changes are sensible to scientists and social movements, but the farmers are not concerned with that. About that, we can. It's an issue of facts. Soils are poorer, and this impacts the productivity of several farms, and they are looking for alternatives, whatever name it's given to the problems that are impacting them. So our goals is to study the change trajectories that are being used in agricultural and livestock production to face the biodiversity and sustainability issues. In Brazil, this is being developed a lot slower than it could, and I think that there's no way to avoid a theme that is quite polemic. But the fact that our agrarian structures really relies on the monotony of production, the fact that we have one product occupying a huge space, this occupation goes through a set of infrastructures and opportunities, market opportunities, that is not untangled from night to day. So it's not an issue of making looking at this sector as the bad guys, but thinking that the agricultural livestock products is one of the few ones that makes this transition a lot harder than a country in which you'd have more diversification. What will be the pathways of this transformation? We'll have bioinputs with the enriching soils, although the exterior passage is monotonous. Will it be through productive diversification? This is what we need to study, but we need to acknowledge that the dependence of a few products, that this has been working so far as a problem for this ecological transformation of the agri-food system. I want to remember something that is important. In the federal government ecological transformation plan, this transformation of the agri-food system was placed afterwards. Before we had only bioeconomy. Now we have bioeconomy and agri-food systems. We need to be able to face and discuss around these hardships. And I believe that this dialogue is happening. It's fertile, and it's a lot higher in the agri-livestock business than in the ultra-processed
Obrigada, Ricardo,
industrial
Marcelo.
sector. Thank you, Ricardo.
Bem
Marcelo.
rapidamente, tá? Eu me
Very
preocupo
quickly.
quando a gente tenta procurar alguma solução
I'm really concerned when we try to look, when we try, when we're trying to find a solution. And usually these transformations are slow because the governments are not able to do this without creating inflation. And then we have the taxes. So the sector is growing, this discussion is growing, and it's evolving a lot in Brazil more than in other countries. So it's we need to understand that this transformation that Ricardo was talking about, it's going to be really long because we have 8 products that represent the most amount of products, but it's in Brazil, 8 in China, in US, in every place. So there's a mindset shift in terms of consumption. So in terms of organic production, Brazil is not growing so big because we don't have the winter. So we have a lot of diseases and plagues of tropical climate. So doing organic production in tropical climate demands a bio-input production. Brazil has been improving in this, but it doesn't cover all the necessities. So we still have a certain limitation. I've been working in the organic sector for 24 years, and throughout these 24 years, we had to change 4 times the place of our production. We had to start from scratch and apply the poison for the poison, not to lose the whole crop, and we had to change to an area to begin a different organic planting, and we've had to do this 4 times during 24 years. It generates a lot of costs. It's very complicated, so a lot of things has to be taken into account when we are producing organic produce. Thank you, Marcelo. Marius, adios. I wanted to answer the previous question and also address the issues that are being talked about now. I'm not so certain about that this debate is within the academia. I think that in the past it was present, but in the most recent years, this debate is not more confined actually in academia and environmental areas. This debate is present in the companies, with the youth, with the social movements, and this is the great opportunity of our times, is to be able to use the opportunity that this is shared among all, but shared throughout a multiplicity of voices and vocabularies that really make it complicated, the search for convergence. So I'm not going to repeat what Marcelo Patrick has said on how to look for these agreements, but I believe that in the recent years we've had a new situation when compared to 10 years ago. So it's important to highlight this because we might understand that we're the only ones concerned with the environmental issues. No, I think this is quite present with a great diversity of players, and it's not a monopoly of part of a scientific group of the environmentalist movement. Concerning about the other topic, I think there are 2 or 3 keywords that can help us in this convergence. The first one is something that our colleagues from Montpellier, where Patrick has been working with, is the idea of coexistence. For a long time, we've always thought about the food systems. Oh, this is the right model, this is the wrong model, and so on. One thing that has been imposing to us is to think about a coexistence of different models. We're going to have the organic agriculture, we're going to have monoculture agriculture, the family agriculture. In each one of these segments, we have a huge diversity on ways to produce. So we have to diminish the space of the antagonism that there is today. Today there's a polarity, there's an antagonism, and we need to make players to get closer, and based on certain criteria on the sustainability debate. And this can be translated in different words, such as Marcelo said. Research made a few years ago really impressed me how the farmers from the Mata Piba really acted in a different way. Oh, this is not only, oh, this is the cost. If we can discuss on how this cost is covered, I can't stop deforesting and so on. So if we are more pragmatic and we acknowledge diversity, we can use this. And the other thing is coordination. We didn't do the transition to the productivist on the green revolution with a silver bullet. We need to coordinate state and private sectors. We need to coordinate research, technology, funding, and markets. I'm not saying that we need to have a ready-made product or idea. If we need to work with different scientific communities, business people, and government to bring together and be more harmonized. Otherwise, we'll have a sort of schizophrenic discussions and we won't be able to advance in transition. Thank you, Arilson. Patrick, I invite you to do the considerations about this question and the final remarks, and the remaining panelists to do their final remarks.
Muito obrigado, Nadine. Vou tentar ficar muito rápido.
Thank you. I'll
Continuando com o
try
que
to
a
speak
Wilson
briefly.
agora acabou de falar,
Carrying on with what
tem que
Arilson was
pensar
speaking,
também
we
que
have
aí
to
a
think
ciência pode ser útil,
about
não
certain
só
things, and science
só
can be
o
useful
trabalhador,
on
tem que
that,
pensar como acompanhar
on
politicamente
how to
essa
follow up
transição através
politically
de
this
não só
transition,
de trajetórias
not
diferenciadas
only
para
on
os
different
diferentes modelos, mas
trajectories for
também
different
na
models,
coexistência. E
but
se
in terms
eu
of
pego
coexistence.
dado,
And if when we
é,
watch a certain
que
data,
ajuda a pensar essa
that
convergência
helps us to
é o
think about
fato
this
de cada
convergence,
de todos agora
is the fact
reconhecer
that
a
everyone
grande
now
diferença
is
entre o
acknowledging the
custo da
huge
alimentação
difference
e o
of the
preço da
cost
alimentação.
of food
Fica
and the
mais ou
price
menos
of food.
o custo 3 vezes mais do
It's
que o
more or
preço.
less cost is 3
Uma
times
vez que
bigger
a gente
than the price.
considera as externalidades em termos
Once we
de saúde
consider
e em termos
externalities
de
in
meio
terms of
ambiente.
health
E esse é
and environment.
consenso através
And
disso.
this is
Não quer
consensus.
dizer que de dia para outro a gente teria que
It
pagar
doesn't
3
mean that
vezes mais
from one day to the other we need to pay 3
bens
times more.
alimentares. Não seria possível
That wouldn't be
socialmente e
possible
politicamente,
to
mas daí se
social
a
and
gente
politically.
olha para os
But if we
subsídios
look
da política
at the
pública para a
subsidies of the
agricultura,
public policies
dá para
for
ver
agriculture,
com dados recentes que dos
we can see
540 bilhões
that
de
from the
dólares, que são o
$540
total
billion,
de investimentos das,
which is the
dos subsídios
total
públicos do mundo,
of public subsidies in the world, 87%
sistemas que não são
favor
sustentáveis.
systems that are not
Esses,
sustainable.
540
These
bilhões de
$540
apenas
billion
corresponde a
correspond
décimo
only to
da
1/10
produção total,
of the
mas
total
esse
production,
décimo e a capacidade
but
de
this tenth and the
redirecionar
ability
esses
of
subsídios
redirect these
para
subsidies
que o custo e o preço converjam
so
muito
that the
mais
cost and the price will be
extremamente
more
importante. Ou
convergent.
seja,
This is hugely
é
important.
papel fundamental da ciência, uma vez
So
que
science
temos a
has an important
convergência
role
de interesse para diminuir
to
todos os
to
fatores,
diminish
para
this gap
diminuir as
between
externalidades, de
cost and
repensar
price,
as
and we have to
políticas
rethink
públicas
about
e
public
incluindo
policies.
não só os subsídios, mas a
And we
base dos
need to include not
subsídios
only
são as
subsides,
regras do
but
comércio
also
internacional.
the rules of international trade.
Muito
Ou
obrigada,
seja,
Patrick.
queria insistir.
Vou agora
Thank you,
convidar.
Patrick. And I'd like to insist
Só uma
on
palavra,
that.
queria insistir sobre essa
Just
maneira
a word,
de repensar o relacionamento entre a
this
ciência
idea of
e política,
rethinking relationship
tomando em conta
between science and politics,
usando e abusando
taking
talvez dessas
into
convergências que
account
nascem agora nesse
these
panorama
convergences
novo.
that we're talking
Muito
within this
obrigada, Patrick.
overview.
Agora convido as últimas palavras, Isabel.
Thank you, Patrick. Isabel, for your
Obrigada,
final
Nadine.
remarks.
Bom, queria
Thank
agradecer
you,
ao
Nadine.
Ricardo, ao Arilson,
I'd like to
ao
thank
Marcelo, ao
Ricardo,
Patrick,
Arilson,
né,
Marcelo,
por
and
estar
Patrick
conosco aqui hoje.
for being here with us
E queria
today.
reforçar que
And
essa
I'd
nossa
like to
iniciativa
highlight that this
é para a
initiative
gente encontrar pontos comuns, uma agenda
is
comum.
for us to
Eu
find
acho
a
que essa
common
agenda comum,
agenda, and I think that
ela
this
vai
common agenda
passar por a gente acordar quais são as
will
prioridades,
pass
né?
us
E
through
para a gente ir bastante
our
tempo para
awakening,
e conseguir enxergar. Marcelo
because
fez
to
logo
be
no
able
começo
to
na
be
fala dele uma
practical,
pergunta. Bom,
practical,
então
it's quite important.
quando,
And
né?
Marcelo was
Muitas
talking
coisas já
about
estão
his
aí,
first
mas quando que a
talk.
gente vai
When
realmente ver
are
a
we
transformação?
really
E
beginning to see
quando
this
era para
transformation?
ontem,
And this
né?
when
Então a urgência está
is
mais que
actually
colocada.
for
Mas a gente
was supposed to
encontrar
be
pontos
yesterday. So
comuns na
if
agenda,
we find common
independente das abordagens
themes on
diferentes que
the
as organizações
agendas,
defendem, a gente
although
conseguir
we
focar
have
e
different
priorizar.
approach,
Isso vai desde priorização
if we can
geográfica até
focus
priorização mesmo
on
dos
the
instrumentos que
implementation
estão
in
mais prontos
terms
para dar
of the
conta de fazer
instruments that
transformação,
are
fazer a mudança de
ready
comportamento, como o Marcelo falou,
to help
eu acho que
this
aí a gente
behavior
consegue
shift.
ganhar e avançar
That's
alguma
where
coisa.
we are
Eu só
able
queria dizer
to
rapidamente que esse evento
put
ele
in,
vai
put
ser
this into action.
traduzido e legendado, a gente vai ter
This
problema
event
na tradução.
will be
Para que
translated
também
and
outros
subtitled
colegas de
so
outros
that
países e outras
other
organizações depois
colleagues from
possam
other countries and other
assistir, a gente vai
organizations can
divulgar.
watch.
E a gente vai ter em
So we're going to
breve uma
publicize this.
página web da
And soon we'll
iniciativa
have
e
a
a gente vai ter ali um
website of the
repositório
initiative.
de tudo que a
Well,
gente
we'll have
andar,
this
de tudo que
huge
acontecer,
archive
dos
of everything
eventos
that
e dos
happens,
anúncios de
all the
próximas
events
ações
of
que a gente
next
tiver, tá? Então
actions that will happen.
aguardem que
So
a gente está providenciando tudo isso.
wait,
Muito obrigada.
and we'll provide this.
Muito obrigada, Isabel. Arilson, últimas considerações?
Thank
Não,
you,
eu também
Isabel.
queria
Arilson,
terminar
final
agradecendo,
considerations?
primeiro a você,
I'd like to
pela,
start off by
condução
thanking you,
do nosso
Nadine,
debate, pela
for
coordenação aí
mediating our
evento,
debate,
aos meus
coordinating the
colegas
event,
aqui que compartilharam
my
também
colleagues
esse tempo
here
comigo, foi
who
um
shared this
privilégio, e a quem
moment with me.
acompanhou a
It
gente
has been a
aqui até
privilege.
agora.
And for those who have followed us
Além
here
desse agradecimento final,
thus
eu
far,
queria dizer que
as well as
vemos
finally
exatamente
offering my
esse
word
início,
of thanks,
apesar da
I'd like to
dramaticidade dos
say
tempos
that
que a gente vive,
in
né?
spite of
Nós, no Brasil,
the
nos últimos anos, a gente tem
drama,
visto também um pouco
drama
com a
we're
moral baixa,
going
né,
through,
digamos assim,
we've
em
been with
relação
low morale
à nossa
recently,
capacidade de
right?
construir
I'm
coisas,
not a pessimist,
mas
okay? I'd
eu
like to say
lembraria aqui
that.
que ao longo dos últimos 100
I'd
anos
like
o
to
Brasil
remind you
teve
that
pelo menos
over the
três
last
grandes
100
revoluções,
years,
né?
Brazil has
A
gone through
gente,
three major
de
transitions.
1930 a
From
1980, o
1930 to
país
1980,
deixou de ser
the
país
country
agrário, passou a
was
ser
no longer
um
an
país
agrarian country,
industrializado,
moved from an
parcialmente, mas um país
agrarian to
industrializado,
partially
urbanizado.
industrialized and
Dos anos
urbanized
60 até
country.
os anos 80,
In
o
the
Brasil saiu da
1960s to
condição,
the
né, de um país
1980s,
deficitário na produção
Brazil
de
came
alimentos
out
para um dos
of
maiores
a
exportadores
food
mundiais.
production
E
deficit
dos anos
situation to
80
one of
para a
the largest food
redemocratização, né, até a
production.
década
And from the
passada, nós
1980s to the
construímos
last
sistemas de
decade,
direitos, né,
we built
construímos
rights
estados, né,
systems.
que
We
reconhecem,
built
direitos para
a
boa parte da
state
população,
that
muito longe do ideal,
recognizes,
né, mas
acknowledges
melhor
rights for
do que muitos países
much of the
próximos a
population.
nós. E nós
Far
temos
from
todas as
ideal, but more
condições
than many
agora, nas
countries
próximas
close
3
to
ou
us.
4
And in
décadas,
the last three or
construir um
four,
novo
the
ciclo na
next
história
three
do
or four
Brasil. E eu estou
decades,
convencido de que o
we are
debate
going to
sobre
create a
sustentabilidade
new cycle in
pode ser
Brazil.
essa
And
grande
I think the
oportunidade.
debate on
Mas para isso nós
sustainability
precisamos
can be
agarrar
such an
essa
opportunity,
oportunidade
but we have to seize
rapidamente
this
e a
opportunity
hora é
quickly.
agora. Essa
And
iniciativa
the
veio
time
para
is now
criar mais espacinho
to go into this
construir esse tipo
initiative
de
and
utopia
create
futura. Então,
one more
fica o
space to
convite
create
para
this
todos,
kind of
para que a
future
gente possa
utopia.
construir isso juntos.
So
Obrigado.
let's build this together. Thank you.
Obrigada, Arilson, pela injeção de
Thank you,
otimismo.
Arilson, for
Marcelo,
the
últimas considerações?
optimism
Coisa
injection.
muito rápida, tá? Eu
Now,
só queria deixar e
Marcelo,
lembrar
well, very
que
briefly, I just
o
like to
futuro de qualquer
remind you
coisa, de
that
qualquer lugar, de
the
qualquer
future
país,
of
qualquer produto,
anything,
qualquer
any
área,
country, any farm, any area
não está nos riscos que as mudanças
is not
climáticas nos
in
mostram hoje,
the risks that the
mas sim
climate
do que
change is
nós
posed
faremos a
today,
partir do
but what
conhecimento desse
we will do
Então, tá
based
aqui
on
o
what we
o
know
nosso ponto
and
inicial.
acquire in terms of
Esse é o
knowledge. That's
ponto
the
inicial
starting
de
point
como a gente se
about
transforma
how
enquanto sociedade em todas as
we
suas
transform as a
etapas
society
da cadeia.
at each
Eu adoro
stage.
sistemas alimentares, que é muito
I
mais
love food
amplo do que
systems.
cadeia alimentar, tá?
I don't like,
Então,
I like it more than
como
food
fazemos a
chain.
partir desse
So
ponto é que
what
nos
we do
guiará
from now on,
a
that
chegar
will
ao nosso lugar.
guide us
Obrigado, Beth,
towards what the
convite, foi um
future will
prazer
be.
estar aqui com você.
So thank you very much for the invitation. It's been a
Obrigada,
pleasure.
Marcelo. Patrick?
Thank you, Marcelo. Patrick?
Ó, eu só uma frase só.
Just one
Fiquei muito
sentence.
feliz
I'm very
estar
happy
convidado e fazer
to
parte
have
da
been
construção dessa
invited
utopia.
to build
Muito
this
obrigada.
utopia, to be
Prazer e a
part of
honra são
it.
nossos. Ricardo?
The honor and pleasure is ours. Thank you. Ricardo, a great joy this conversation has been most interesting. It's already enough for those watching to feel what our initiative will be like. I think we have been able to move from commonplace and try within this short amount of time, try to bring up important issues, backdrop issues from the Montpellier effort that Patrick mentioned, very much geared towards the relationship between science and the practical side. This discussion will continue, of course, and I'd like to invite you all to an event that the Comida de Amanhã Cebrap Institute, José de Castro chair, everyone within the realm of G20, we are organizing this for the 12th of June with many guests. I won't use the time here to list them, but it will be a very interesting online event. Everyone's invited to participate. And what matters here, the major novelty we have today, in addition to those referred to by my predecessors here today, Marcel, I think this is important, the difference between agri-food systems and agri-food chains. When you talk about agri-food food system, you are talking about the relationship between food and the relationship. It moves beyond agri-food chains, and this involves a set of values. I think that what Marcelo showed us in his presentation with regard to Asia is the expression of a set of ethical and normative values which are more and more guiding the behavior of the players involved in the agri-food system. How will these values translate into objectives, strategies, tactics, work programs? Well, we'll see about that as time goes on. But what matters are those values, and these values seem to me, well, the climate crisis is making these values more and more reinforced and adopted as by a major set of players, with the exception of the fundamentalist fanatics, etc. But that's, another story. Thanks
Muito
very
obrigada,
much.
Ricardo. Infelizmente,
Thank you,
estamos chegando ao
Ricardo.
final do
We are
nosso webinar.
reaching the end
A
of our
expectativa é que
webinar.
tenha feito fervilhar
Unfortunately,
ideias e
we hope it
impulsionar
has,
ações. Caso
brought
você que
up some ideas
nos
bubbling.
assiste tenha colocado alguma pergunta que não
For
pôde
those
ser
who are
respondida no
watching us, if
chat
you
por
have
conta do
included
tempo,
a
foi
question because
sinalizado
of
um
time that
e-mail no
cannot be
chat, que é o
answered, we have left you an email,
imaflora@imaflora.org,
imaflora
onde a
at
pergunta pode ser encaminhada e
imaflora.org,
vai ser
where you
respondida
can
posteriormente.
convey your
Eu
questions to be
destaco que
dealt
para
with
esse
later
evento que o
on.
Ricardo acabou de anunciar em
As
primeira mão,
Ricardo
com trazendo mais
said,
detalhes,
firsthand, I'd
que
like to
vão ter
highlight the
atenção à
fact
divulgação por
that
meio do site e
um,
redes sociais
pay
das
attention
instituições
to the
parceiras, do
dissemination
Cebrap,
via the
mas
partner
também
institution
Comida da
sites and the
Manhã,
event
IDEC e
websites,
outras instituições,
Comida de
e
Amanhã, other
manter,
institutions,
agradeço muito e presença e
um,
disponibilidade de todos
IDEC.
os
So thank
painelistas
you,
e
all the
também a
panelists,
presença e o
to all the
prestígio de
panelists
cada
for your
pessoa que esteve
availability
conosco nessa
and the
manhã. Uma ótima
attendance and
continuidade de dia
prestige
para
given
vocês e
by
até a
those
próxima.
here present. Have a great day
Que
and see you
ótimo.
next
Tchau,
time.
gente. Um abraço. Super
Thank you,
obrigada.
everyone. Thanks very much.
Obrigado.
All the best. Take care.
Próximo,